English major at Harvard. After that, she spent time at Columbia State, Princeton, where she was most recently the director of creative writing. Among her many awards and accolades, Smith won the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry in 2011 and served 2 terms as the Poet Laureate of the United States from 2017 to 2019. During that time, she spearheaded a project called American Conversations, where she traveled across the country to rural communities to promote discussions around poetry. She is the author of 5, I think, volumes of poetry and a memoir, and the editor of Divining Poets on poet Lucille Clifton, who is one of her mentors. Her book, Such Color, New and Selected Poems, was just released this month. Tracy is special not only for her giftedness with language, but also for her ability to talk about poetry and its role in promoting a greater good by helping us understand issues of race, justice, and the human experience. In a recent piece on her, Time magazine writes, "Her poems, which delight in humanity's sprawling yet thrilling range of emotions, love and grief, desire and rage, joy and hope, often find the political within the personal, beckoning readers to engage with their own curiosities about the narratives they've been told about racism, power, and justice." When he rescued the Grolier from closing, my father, Fanny Mankiti, gave as one of his reasons that he had a deep belief in the power of poetry to heal our world. I'm sure my father would have loved to be here hosting and discussing poetry with you tonight, as I think that you share that belief in the power of poetry to help understand and improve the human experience. We are so glad that you're back here in Cambridge now as a professor at Harvard. And so on behalf of my mom and James and Elizabeth and everyone here at Grolier, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dee Dee. I'm so grateful and honored to be here. I have been in this store as a shy undergraduate, looking and hiding at the same time, feeling like, oh, maybe I don't deserve to be in the presence of all of this amazing poetry, but also knowing how much it fed me. And it means a lot to be in Cambridge, to be back at Harvard, where poetry did become a real tool, source, point of reference, community. And I'm just, I'm happy you guys are here too. I like the top halves of your faces. So I am sharing this bill tonight with one of my mentors and certainly one of my heroes, Lucille Clifton. I was her student at Columbia and again at Cave Canem. And I'm going to start by reading some of my own work, but I want to say that it's Clifton's ability to talk courageously about other worlds and their bearing upon this world that made poetry feel to me like something that's connected to faith, which has also been real for me throughout my life. And her conscience, her abiding, it's more than a belief in the sanctity of Black life, her willingness to frame and reframe that fact, that principle throughout her body of work in searing and warm and joyful and hilarious and chastening ways, through a body of work that's masterful and prophetic, is a gift to humanity. I'm going to start by reading some of my little poems and then we'll get to her work. But this is one of the voices that I'm reaching toward. This is one of the visions of humanity, of time, of history that has shaped my imagination. So I'm going to read some poems from Such Color that are striving in that way. And maybe I'll go back to a couple of early poems. I don't know this book as the geography of this book as well, so I'm gonna have to use the table of contents. But I wanna start with a poem called Bright from my first book. Oh, yeah, sorry, camera. Called Bright, and it opens with an epigraph that reads, One night, as Prince Henry of Portugal lay in bed, it was revealed to him that he would render a great service to our Lord by the discovery of the said Ethiopias. And this comes from a Portuguese explorer named Duarte Pacheco Pereira, who wrote that in 1506. And so this is maybe one of the first poems in which I was thinking about the story of empire, which is so often told as inevitable. And we know that it's not. Bright. The catfish in the kitchen drift toward the concave horizon of the steel bowl where they sleep, drunk now, surely, on cognac, honey, green onion. And I hate the way my teeth rehearse that ceremony, how my tongue, greedy mollusk, flexes in the basin of my mouth. When the first fair ankles waded onto shore on Cape Bianco, the men balanced above them blinked back sweat. Weeks of salt fish, wine, and wind like a wife who's glimpsed her rival had unsteadied them. So they weren't sure at first that what they saw wasn't simply the mind telling them enough, or whether it was true. Lean bodies, shadows incarnate with a grace both dark and bright, as though the world were showing off. Black, like sable, like the deep center of the darkest fruit, the first fig, primordial, not sin, not yet, but satisfaction. Black as the space between stars, distance not fathomed, fearsome, like the restless waves they'd fought against, risk and promise at once. At first sight of those bodies, like mine or any other, no, like mine, but intact. Why did those men assuage that
The audio is
entire
better
day,
on this.
be drunk
Something
on
wrong with the
parchment,
video, my audio on
not
this.
think the Lord is grand? Why was that riddle not something they knelt to? Why, instead, did they take it as sign that their want should lead them? The riddle doesn't go away. Even as I push my fork into the belly of each sleeping fish, testing forgive, tasting that distant dream of watery flight, I wonder if your language of vowels, blood that whispers back to sails atilt on some horizon, back to men like that, and I, whose work tonight will be only to offer. I wonder if you and I have not, perhaps, beheld one another, flash of teeth, trickle of adrenaline, elsewhere and before. Do you remember, some of you might, 2008, 2009, there were a lot of stories in the news and even a couple of movies about Somali pirates hijacking like freight ships and cargo ships. And because of the way that, the news is produced and because of the imagination that we live inside of in this country, that story was framed in really simplistic terms. These bad people do this awful, unthinkable thing to good people from places like where we live. I didn't like that. And I also didn't like how easily at first I accepted that. And so I wanted to write a poem that helped me to do a different kind of thinking around this question. And so this is the poem that came out of that. It's called Ransom. When the freighters inch past the distance, the men load their small boats. They motor out, buzzing like mosquitoes, aimed at the iron sides of the blind ship as it creeps closer. They have guns. They know the sea like it is their mother, and she is not well. Her fish are gone. She heaves barrels leaking disease onto the shores. When she goes into a fit, she
Hang on, I'm sorry.
land,
Let me listen.
houses, people.
I'm sorry. Yes, of course, dear.
She glows in a way she should not. She tastes of industry. No one is fighting for her, and so they fight. By night, they load their boats and motor out. And by day, they aim their guns at the ships, climbing aboard. It is clear what they want. The white men scramble. Some fight back. When one is taken, the whole world sits up to watch. When the pirates fall, the world smiles to itself, thanking goodness. They show the black faces and the dead black bodies on TV. When the pirates win, after the great white ships return to their own shores, there is a party that lasts for days.
So good.
Thank you. I hear you. I'm going to read a poem that I lost my dad in, actually, today is the anniversary of his death, 13 years ago. And during that time of grieving, I was also expecting my first child. And I felt myself to be closer to, the veil or something. And Clifton's work activated my understanding of what that might mean. This is a poem that I hear her voice in. It's actually a section of the last section of a poem called The Speed of Belief. You stepped out of the body, unzipped it like a coat. And will it drag you back as flesh, voice, scent? What heat burns without touch? And what does it become? What are they that move through these rooms without even the encumbrance of shadows? If you are one of them, I praise the God of all gods, who is nothing and nowhere, a law, immutable proof. And if you are bound by habit or will to be one of us again, I pray you are what waits to break back into the world through me. I'll read a few new poems and then some Clifton poems. This new work, so when I was in Lucille Clifton's class, she used to tell us really candid, vulnerable stories, I now realize, about talking to her dead mother or talking to her dead husband or being approached, if that's the right word, by voices that had urgent messages. I'm going to read some of those poems. One sequence that came into the world in one of her last books called Mercy. The sequence is called The Message from the Ones, was written in the early or the late 70s. And I think it took her a long time to figure out how to shape that into the poem, or maybe just how to share it with the world. But I also remember that when I visited her papers, which are at Emory University, there are thousands of pages of Ouija board transcriptions. She and her kids would use a Ouija board almost every day in the 70s. And you can see someone was writing all the letters down almost without lifting the pen off the page. And then later someone would go through and divide the words up and get this message. And in her paper, she had told us about that. And I didn't realize how serious she was about it until I saw these boxes and boxes. And within these boxes, there are many drafts of an unfinished essay in which she defends this practice. I mean, to herself even. So she says, there are so many different formulations, but again and again, she says, Some of this is influenced by our wishes and our urges, and we are guiding it sometimes, maybe half the time. But if that's true, then half the time, this is real. And that struck her as a miracle. And I love that perspective. I hope that we can do something to share some of those narratives, because they are as prophetic as the work that she did end up distilling. But she was someone who saw and heard and wasn't ashamed about the proximity of that to writing poems. And I want to claim that. I want to claim that belief in logos. So I'll read you some new poems that are for me coming from a similar wish, coming from a meditative practice that is new to me, but that also I feel fostered a two-way dialogue with something that was not me. Riot. Sometimes I feel the black in my heart like a map made of tar. You need only part your lips to mar what isn't yours. Think better. Don't bother. Your druthers clog my sieve is the matter. We pay to live. Our nerves carry a charge. We grieve each day. We pray for you. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. How thick is memory? How deep the grave? Thick is memory. Deep the grave. How many are we? Many are we? What have we been led here to learn, to teach? We have been led here to learn, to teach. Is life within our grasp? Life within is in our grasp. Have we ever felt death so near as we do this year? Have we ever? Near, dear, year upon year. The ancestors live upstairs in a room without chairs. When I visit, they welcome me without words. They crouch, encircling me. They are without edges. Wordless, they fill me. Warmth without weight. I ask for something. Without shame, I beg. They owe me nothing, but they give. They give. Can you hold my death in your mind? Can you leave it there? Live and let grieve? I like you. And like you, I move through the days. A dark shape is what my body makes. Good is how I was taught to look, to be, despite what's done to me. Woe is me. To say is to do is also true. Woe is you. This is not the riot. This is reality. It rolls, roils, briefly recoils. It hammers down. We fall, rebound. You chase. We race. You hate. We wait. I want to read this poem that maybe this is the poem that'll be the hinge toward Clifton's work. It's called Some Trees. You'll recognize that title, right? That's a John Ashbery poem. This is a poem that is looking with a different set of questions. Some trees. The live branches, the solid trunks, the leaves a tilt in summer sun. What trees know, they know from what the rains bring. what's carried on the breeze from their railroad of roots under the gridwork of our streets. Some trees bear our very scars, high up on their bark, up in their crook of arms, up in the traffic of leaves. Fact cleaves. The message is only now arriving in my city and yours, and on the far shores of the nationless sea. A man was lynched yesterday, is what some trees seem to say. So look at how organized I am. 1,000 Post-its. We'll see what that realistically gives way to. But I think I'd like to start with this poem, and many of Clifton's poems are untitled. Surely I am able to write poems celebrating grass and how the blue in the sky can flow green or red, and the waters lean against the Chesapeake shore like a familiar. Poems about nature and landscape, surely. But whenever I begin, the trees wave their knotted branches, and why is there under that poem always an other poem? Mm-hmm. Now you gotta snap for Lucille Clifton. I didn't come here to have that not happen. Okay, and I'll read this other poem called The Photograph a Lynching. And this poem is really useful to me in thinking about the way that time works in Clifton's imagination, because she's in this time, her time. She is aware of and summoning her connections to the generations that she descends from, but she's also aware of something outside of human time, something after history. And she believes that we're accountable to that. And so as much as her poetry is rooted in an allegiance to Blackness, it is also saying this is the first step. You have to love us, and then you have to love the world. So this is a poem that I think does that so succinctly and powerfully and indelibly, as her poems always do. The Photograph a Lynching. Is it the cut glass of their eyes looking up toward the new gnarled branch of the Black man hanging from a tree? Is it the white milk pleated collar of the woman smiling toward the camera, her fingers loose around a Christian cross drooping against her breast? Is it all of us captured by history into an accurate album? Will we be required to view it together under a gathering sky? The last day. We will find ourselves surrounded by our kind, all of them now wearing the eyes they had only imagined possible, and they will reproach us with those eyes in a language more actual than speech, asking why we allowed this to happen, asking why, for the love of God, we did this to ourselves. And we will answer in our feeble voices, because. I moved here. I bought a house next to what I knew would become another house. And there are a lot of trees on this land. And I thought, oh, great, they're going to build a house under those trees, and that will be my neighbor. And then a few weeks later, once it really felt like my house I was living in and my land I was looking at, even though it isn't, they came and started cutting down those trees. And every day for that, that adjustment period, I thought of this poem, The Killing of the Trees. The third went down with a sound almost like flaking, a soft swish as the left leaves fluttered themselves and died. 3 of them, 4, then 5, stiffening in the snow, as if this hill were wounded knee, as if the slim feathered branches were bonnets of war, as if the pale man seated high in the bulldozer nest, his blonde mustache ice matted, was Pahuska, come again, but stronger now, his long hair wild and unrelenting. Remember the photograph, the old warrior, his stiffened arm raised as if in blessing, his frozen eyes open, his bark skin brown and not so much wrinkled as circled with age, and the snow everywhere still falling, covering his one good leg. Remember his name was Spotted Tail or Hump or Red Cloud or Geronimo or none of these or all of these. He was a chief. He was a tree falling the way a chief falls, straight, eyes open, arms reaching for his mother ground. So I have come to live among the men who kill the trees, a subdivision, new in southern Maryland. I have brought my witness eye with me and my 2 wild hands, the left one sister to the fists pushing the bulldozer against the old oak. The angry right, brown and hard and spotted as bark. We come in peace, but this morning, ponies circle what is left of life, and whales and continents and children and ozone and trees huddle in a camp, weeping outside my window, and I can see it all with that one good eye. I'll read 2 more of her poems and then share this deck with you because it's kind of a lovely way of carrying bits of her work around. We are running, and time is clocking us from the edge like an only daughter. Our mothers stream before us, cradling their breasts in their hands. Oh, pray that what we want is worth this running. Pray that what we're running toward is what we want. And oh, this is great. This is the last poem that I'll read. Oh, great. I'm so happy. Thank you. I think she did this, made me go backwards. Whose side are you on? The side of the bus stop woman trying to drag her bag up the front steps before the doors clang shut. I am on her side. I give her exact change, and him, the old man hanging by one strap, his work hand folded shut as the bus doors. I am on his side. When he needs to leave, I ring the bell. I am on their side, riding the late bus into the same someplace. I am on the dark side always, the side of my daughters, the side of my tired sons. So you see this is here, the collected poems of Lucille Clifton, and it has a foreword by Toni Morrison, and it has an essay by Kevin Young, who edited it with Clifton's editor, Michael Glazer. And then there's also a selected volume of her poems edited by Araceli Spermai. One to leave on your bedside, one to put in your backpack. And then you have these cards. So I was at a party a couple of years ago, and I met Ruth Greenstein, who's the editor or the publisher of Turtle Point Press. And she was telling me, oh, we do these things, these divining decks. They're about the size of tarot cards, and they take lines from poets. So far we've done Emily Dickinson and Rumi. And do you have any ideas? Would you want to edit one of these decks? And I said, yes, you have to do a deck of Lucille Clifton, because she was a seer and a channeler of voices. And thankfully, they were excited to do that, and I was able to edit it with David Trinidad, who's the series editor, and he was really excited about Clifton and offered me some, help in selecting, because there's a lot to choose from. And so the premise of these cards is I've been sitting here like holding them and shuffling them. You can shuffle them and you can ask a question and allow the work or the poet to guide you to an answer. So does anyone have a question? Okay.
How do you deal with insecurity?
Okay. Do you want to shuffle it and choose a card?
I'm not great at shuffling.
Or you can, however you want to move them around.
I have learned to carry it the way a poor man learns to carry everything.
Okay, I'm sold. Yeah. Anybody else want to ask a question? All right, I'll just pick one. For the question everybody's not asking. It is the light in us. It is the light of us. That will be the last word for the evening, I think. Thank you. So we can do what is done at this time and readings. James, what should we do?
Are you okay to answer a few questions?
Mhm.
Does anyone
Sure.
like to ask a question?
How do you write through grief? I know you've written a lot about your father's death and you've used poetry to cope. And so what advice would you give to those of us who aren't perhaps as talented in writing, but who also like to channel, our emotions or sadness or loss through poetry?
Mm-hmm. One side of the answer to the question that I have is when I have unwieldy material, like I did in writing those elegies for my dad, and a huge desire to connect, I need help. And so that's when I turn to form. That's when I turn to a received, even a rigid form, because it corrals my thoughts and it forces me to think in a way that's other than how I normally think. I don't think in rhyme. I don't think in patterns of repetition. And so doing that, some people think it allows the unconscious mind to have larger sway within the poem, and things come out that sometimes need to come out. And one example is I was writing a poem in that elegy sequence that I was a terzerima, and the rhyme scheme forced me to say something that I wouldn't have normally said, but it allowed me to express that there were moments in my life when I didn't want to be under my father's thumb. I wasn't always, revering him. I wouldn't have let myself say that in the occasion of an elegy, but the rhyme said, you got to say it. And that's helpful. And I think many poets are looking for something that helps them to say more than they're capable of saying when left to their own devices. And so form can do that. But the other side of the answer that I have is poetry is this amazing tool for traveling time. And we know that, in the same way that montage works in a film, you can leap forward and backward. But I also think that poetry puts us in contact with those feelings of upheaval and need that also, or trauma sometimes, that also, I think, thrust us into a different relationship with time. That's not linear. The past is suddenly there. You're in it again. And that can be a tool. That can be a vehicle in a way. And so those two things can get you a long way, I think.
We've got a question from Zoom.
It is, to what extent has her academic training helped or hindered her natural poetic voice? That's from Whiskey Radish.
I think that every time I learn something, it helps my poetry. And I use my poems not to say what I've learned, but to kind of dig into the questions that I have or the anxiety, most often the anxieties. And being trained in research, being trained in thinking that the act of writing is a process of interrogation and discovery. The essay teaches us that. I think that's only bolstered my practice as a poet. And it also means that I can turn from a logical, linear thought process or vocabulary to the leaping, associative, unconscious behavior of a poem, knowing that that other stuff is there. And I think that's really important. I don't feel the need often to bring that argument, that form of linear argumentation. I know arguments are alive in those poems, but they're not conceived in the same way. I'm arguing with myself in the poem as opposed to trying to persuade someone. Okay, 2 questions.
I kind of already asked this, but I'm wondering if at this stage in your career, if you still ever encountered doubt about your writing, and sort of what tools you turn to discern like what is maybe true and what is maybe deserving of doubt, if that can be said.
I feel doubt every day. It's funny to come back to your alma mater and to think, okay, they like me. But I also remember I was a mess. I was lost. I was lazy. I was confused. I was dreamy. I was hopeful. And so I'm back in, touch with that kid.
Right.
That fosters doubt in an interesting way. What do you do with it? What do you do with it, Roger? What do you do with doubt?
I use it in the poem. Use the doubt to generate the poem. The doubt because the doubt is the place for me to where it's the biggest question. It's the question I'm trying to avoid. And so that's the place that the poem needs to go.
That's where you start rhyming.
Yeah. Or that's also the place where you ask for help, right? So rhyme can be a form of help. Ancestors can be a form of help. Lucille Clifton's process, the path that she charts with a poem can be a kind of help. Prayer can be a kind of help. All of that, I bring that in because I think I'm writing to make it easier to keep living. I want to publish books. I want to do all that stuff, but that's secondary. And so the doubt is almost inescapable, but it's got to be like an impetus to something, Yeah. What was your question?
First, thank you so much for the reading. It's so fantastic. And this is kind of a question that's in a similar vein to the previous one, but if you could give your undergraduate poet self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Let's hear it.
Okay. I don't know. There is a part of me that is so grateful that I took myself that seriously, that age, that young, because it was like, I can't go out tonight because I'm devoting time to my craft. I've given my life to I said that, but it made me hold on to this thing, I think I would have said, you're going to feel a kind of despair early on because there are things that you want that are far off, and they have to be far off. That's probably what I would have said, and she would have been like, but I think it's true.
Yeah. I guess in a similar vein, sort of how do you make more space for questions and inviting questions instead of feeling that impetus towards like a desire for answers within your poem? I know poetry sort of provides that space, but do you ever fight with that?
Well, I read the poems. I feel fed by the silences in these poems. and the generous Laureate. Like there are like, what was the poem? She has opportunities in every poem, the trees, to condemn, but she chooses to put herself in a vulnerable and implicit, or in what is it? We are in a state of implication in some cases because she's human. I love that. I love that there's this large, deep, difficult space that her poems hover around. And I love poems in other voices that do that. You know, Keats would call it the negative capability, right? Poems that are willing to dwell in uncertainty or mystery. So when I think I want to say it how it is, I remember, but the charge of this large thing that knows more is what I really am interested in getting close to. So the first draft will say it. The first draft I'll be the hero. And then I'll allow these other voices to coax me beyond that feeling of heroism. Yeah. Okay. You.
Along that line, how do you know when something is working for your own self, and then when do you know, or how do you know to stop when it's not?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know when something's not working because I'm bored reading it. Like I'm there's a lot that's trying too hard. There's a lot that's demonstrating something. And there's a lot that's familiar from other poems that I've written. And I know, though, to keep going when there's something that I believe this question or topic can offer that I just don't know how to say or tap into yet. I was just working on something this week that I was like, oh, this is a mess. This is all my bad habits. This is sloppy thinking. This is all these phrases that I know how to say, but my question is big. I need this to help me. I need to stick. And so coming back and saying, I'm going to cut all of that. It sounds nice, but we've done this before. It's hiding something. I'm going to let go of the confidence that a certain tone gives me, and I'm going to be real in a different way or transparent in a different way. And I just go through making these choices because I know that they'll help me walk further out on, whatever limb I'm actually interested in. And when it's done, I know it's going to be done. I don't know how to describe it. I get this ever since I was, 19 writing poems. I get this itch when I can see the work is beginning to assert something. And it's something I didn't know when I started. And then I have that feeling like, oh, okay, it's possible if I can do the right thing to follow through on that. And then that's when my training comes in, when my ear, my eye, the eye that builds images, the side of my personality that likes balance and formal kind of like beauty comes in. And then I realize, oh, right, there's a pattern that will be completed when this next line is written. And then the poem is going to tell me what it's been waiting to say. It's just magic, but I trust that. And I also trust that feeling of when something isn't right, when I'm letting it sit, maybe even publishing it, but knowing it doesn't have that same life force, But the stakes are low. It's a poem. It's okay if it's not right. So, but you had a question. Maybe this will be the last question.
Just getting back to Lucille Clifton. This summer I was at the library, and as I often do, sort of just going through the shelves, and I saw her books there, and I thought, oh wow, I have not read Lucille Clifton in probably 10 years, and it was a wonderful thing because when she was still living, I felt a sense of immediacy in her poems that I was wondering was still there, wondering whether that was still there. And I came across that wonderful sequence that she did after 9/11 that just totally drew me in, and definitely experienced that immediacy still these years later. And I'm just wondering if that's an experience that you had as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel more susceptible to the you're calling it immediacy. I would just call it the vast breath or something that animates these poems that make them feel alive. The farther I get from having known her and realizing she continues to speak, things I couldn't hear when I first read those poems, or even when I heard her read those poems, are still speaking now, and they're legible, they're, unignorable. I think that's a sign of a great poet, and she absolutely is a great poet. Yeah.
This isn't a question. I just want to thank you for the slowdown.
Oh, thanks.
It was my companion for much of the pandemic. And the thing that I loved about it as much as the poems was the way that you situated them in your life and in the world, which I think if poetry is working, that's what it does. It like calls to us in our day and helps us. And it's just such a wonderful thing that you've created. I'm so glad that Yi Lei is continuing it.
Yeah, me too.
So thank you.
Oh, thanks for listening. Yeah, thanks for that. And thanks for coming. It was really nice to be in the space. Thanks for your questions. And have a great night.
Here, move them over to the wall. We have some books for sale. Tracy will sign some books over here too.
Thanks so much for coming. Oh, thank you. It's so good to see you. Oh, oh God, I love it.
Like, you know what I love is I have their when the light came to me so quickly. Those like there's actually there's this scholar named Kevin Watson. He's at Brown. He just wrote a book called Black Aliveness: Poetics of Being. And it just came out, and he writes about this.
Okay, I gotta
It's
write this down.
down.
How do you spell his last name?
Washington's brother is Q-U-A